failure. It's one of the most uncomfortable words in the human vocabulary. For most of us, the moment we hear it, our stomachs tighten, our confidence sinks, and a shadow of shame begins to creep in. From a very young age, we're conditioned to believe that failure is something to avoid at all costs. In school, a failing grade meant we weren't good enough. On the sports field, losing a game meant we didn't train hard enough. In business, a failed idea was branded as wasted time and wasted money. Over time, we learn to equate failure with rejection, disappointment, and weakness. And yet, if you peel back the curtain on every story of extraordinary achievement, you'll find a trail of failures that laid the groundwork for greatness. The truth is, failure isn't the end of the road, it's the very soil in which success takes root. If success is a towering oak tree, failure is the seed buried underground, seemingly lifeless at first, but secretly germinating with potential. Think about some of the most celebrated individuals in history. Thomas Edison, the man who brought electric light to the world, is often quoted as saying, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Each failed experiment wasn't a verdict on his intelligence or ability. It was simply a necessary data point on the path to innovation. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most powerful women in media, was fired from her first television job because she was told she wasn't fit for TV. Imagine if she had accepted that judgment as final. Millions of lives around the world would never have been touched by her influence. Even Michael Jordan, who is often celebrated as the greatest basketball player of all time, once confessed, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Their stories prove something vital. Failure doesn't define us, how we respond to failure does. Although we admire these figures for overcoming failure, we often fail to apply the same logic to ourselves. We romanticize other people's setbacks as stepping stones while treating our own as roadblocks. Why? Because failure feels personal. When an idea collapses or a project flops, it doesn't just wound our plans, it wounds our sense of self. We interpret failure as a reflection of who we are, not just what we attempted. That's why one of the first steps to unlocking unstoppable success is to redefine failure. We need to strip it of its negative connotations and start seeing it for what it truly is: feedback, growth, and preparation for something bigger. To redefine failure, you must first recognize that it is not the opposite of success. It's a component of success. Success is not a straight line that stretches from effort to victory. It's a jagged, unpredictable path filled with false starts, detours, and breakdowns. If you look closely at any successful journey, you'll see that failure doesn't sit at the end of the road, it sits at every turn, every milestone, and every pivot point. Without those breakdowns, there would be no breakthroughs. Imagine building a skyscraper without testing the strength of the foundation. Imagine launching a spacecraft without ever running simulations that fail, crash, or reveal flaws. Without failure, success would be brittle, temporary, and superficial. With failure, success becomes deep-rooted, resilient, and lasting. Let me share a story that illustrates this point on a more personal scale. A young entrepreneur I once coached launched a startup with boundless enthusiasm. He poured every ounce of his energy into the project, convinced that his idea was bulletproof. Within 18 months, the company collapsed. The market wasn't ready, the execution wasn't precise, and he found himself staring at bankruptcy. For weeks, he spiraled into self-doubt, convinced that failure meant he wasn't cut out to be an entrepreneur. But eventually, he made a critical shift. Instead of asking, "Why did I fail?" he asked, "What did failure teach me?" That subtle reframing unlocked a wealth of insight about his blind spots, his assumptions, and his decision-making patterns. Armed with those lessons, he launched a second business. This time, it flourished. The difference wasn't that he became suddenly smarter or luckier. The difference was that his failure had sharpened him into a more effective, strategic, and resilient leader. His collapse wasn't the end, it was the foundation. To shift the way you see failure so radically that instead of fearing it, you begin to embrace it as a secret weapon. Imagine how differently you would live if you didn't fear failure, but welcomed it as a mentor. Imagine how many risks you would take, how many ideas you would test, how many doors you would knock on, if you knew that failing was never final, but simply a step forward. Imagine the freedom of detaching your identity from the outcome of your attempts. You wouldn't shrink at the thought of rejection, because you would understand that rejection redirects you toward the right opportunities. You wouldn't freeze when faced with uncertainty, because you would recognize that uncertainty is where your greatest growth resides. Redefining failure doesn't mean glorifying it for its own sake. Failure is not the goal. No one wakes up in the morning hoping to crash and burn. The purpose of failure is not to romanticize struggle, but to recognize that struggle is fertile ground. Failure only becomes a weapon when it is wielded intentionally. If you simply stumble, fall, and never reflect, then failure remains what most people assume it to be: wasted effort. But if you fail with awareness, if you pause to dissect, analyze, and extract meaning, then failure transforms into your most valuable resource. It becomes your personal laboratory for success. That's why in this journey we're going to dive deep into the specific ways failure fuels unstoppable success. You'll see how failure exposes your blind spots, builds resilience, fuels innovation, sharpens clarity, and strengthens your emotional intelligence. Each of these dimensions reveals a hidden superpower that only failure can unlock. Success without failure is like a diamond without pressure, unpolished, untested, and incomplete. But success forged through failure, that's unbreakable. So as we begin, I invite you to reframe your relationship with failure. Instead of running from it, lean into it. Instead of labeling it as defeat, rename it as feedback. Instead of asking, how do I avoid failure? Start asking, how do I maximize the lessons within failure? This subtle but profound shift is the difference between those who dabble in dreams and those who achieve unstoppable success. In the chapters ahead, you'll see why failure is not just a detour on the way to success, it is the way. Every person has blind spots. They are the unseen corners of our character, the weaknesses we overlook, the assumptions we make without testing, and the mistakes we're too close to recognize. Blind spots are not just about flaws, they can also be hidden strengths that we haven't yet developed because we don't realize they're waiting within us. And here's the paradox. You will rarely find your blind spots through success. Success can make us overconfident, even blind to the very gaps that could undermine us later. But failure holds up a mirror. Failure doesn't politely suggest that you might be overlooking something. It throws it in your face and dares you to pay attention. Think of failure as your greatest diagnostic tool. Just like a doctor runs tests to find out what's wrong in the body, failure runs tests on your decisions, your habits, and your mindset. If something collapses, it means there was a hidden weakness in the structure. Maybe it was a lack of preparation. Maybe it was a gap in knowledge. Maybe it was a flaw in strategy. Whatever it is, failure has just revealed it to you in the most undeniable way possible. The pain of failure forces awareness, and awareness is the first step toward mastery. Take the story of J.K. Rowling before she became the best-selling author of Harry Potter. She was rejected by 12 different publishers. Each rejection revealed a blind spot, not in her storytelling ability, but in her understanding of the publishing industry and how to position her work. Those blind spots could have paralyzed her, but instead, she kept adjusting, kept learning, and eventually found a publisher that believed in her vision. Today, her story is celebrated worldwide, but what's often overlooked is that without those initial rejections, the failures, she might never have refined her craft or her persistence. On a more practical level, consider a business launching a new product. If it flops in the market, that failure might expose blind spots in the company's research, marketing, or understanding of customer needs. While success would have simply reinforced existing strategies, failure shines a harsh light on the flaws. This is why some of the greatest entrepreneurs actively seek small failures early on. They would rather fail fast and learn what's broken than succeed superficially and miss the cracks that could later cause a collapse. Failure, in this sense, is like a pressure test. It reveals where the system isn't strong enough to withstand the weight of growth. On a personal level, blind spots can also hide in our mindset. Maybe you believe you're disciplined until failure shows you that procrastination has been silently sabotaging your progress. Maybe you believe you're a great communicator until a failed relationship or partnership reveals that you don't listen as deeply as you thought. These are humbling moments, yes, but they are also invaluable. Because once failure exposes a blind spot, you can never unsee it. The discomfort may sting, but it plants a seed of awareness that allows you to improve. And in that awareness lies your power. The key is how you respond when failure unmasks your blind spots. Some people retreat. They take exposure as humiliation and shut down. Others lean in. They take exposure as education and level up. That choice makes all the difference. Failure's real gift is not in the fall itself, but in the lens it provides to see yourself and your world more clearly. It's like cleaning fog off a window. The view might not always be pleasant, but it's real, and reality is always a better foundation for growth than illusion. Let's pause here and apply this to your own life. Think of a time when you failed recently. Maybe it was a project at work, a personal goal, or a relationship. Ask yourself, what blind spots did that failure reveal? Did it show you something about your habits, your assumptions, your skills, or your resilience? Did it reveal a weakness that you've been avoiding, or a strength you didn't know you needed to develop? Sit with those questions, because the answers are pure gold. Those insights are the exact stepping stones that will lead you closer to success. And here's the beauty. Once you begin to train your mind to see failure as feedback, you'll actually start seeking it. You'll take more risks, try more experiments, and step outside your comfort zone because you'll understand that each failure is simply shining a light into another blind spot. Over time, this process turns you into a sharper, wiser, more complete version of yourself. Where others see defeat, you'll see discovery. Where others run from failure, you'll lean into it with curiosity. That's why failure exposing your blind spots is not a setback, it's a superpower. It's life's way of refining you, chiseling away your illusions, and preparing you for a stronger, clearer, more unstoppable path forward.